All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and
G'day.
welcome back to Theology Thursday. Our second run of the morning, since I just accidentally deleted the first one. So, what are we going to be talking about today, Dave?
Well, there's a story that's told about a couple of hens talking, and one hen says to the other, "I don't know what that rooster's crowing about." And then they look through the farmhouse window at a family eating a roast chicken dinner with the visiting pastor. And the second hen says, "I think it's just that one of his kids entered the ministry."
Boom, boom,
Boom.
Yeah.
But we hear this phrase, the ministry. And as soon as we hear that, we understand they're talking about a person. But what does it really mean?
Yeah.
What is ministry? So I thought it would be good for us to consider something of a theology of ministry. And a good place to start is with the word itself, to get a clear, simple definition of the word ministry.
Okay.
So our English word minister comes from the Latin ministerium, which means a servant. Ministry is the act of serving. So a minister is one who serves as a means, as an instrumentality, a means of service. Webster defines a minister as a person or thing through which something is accomplished. So the verb, the doing word, means to serve.
Right.
And so any noun that we take from the verb has to reflect that, has to be associated with that definition.
Right.
So ministry is about doing rather than simply being.
Right.
But over the years, we've changed our understanding of this word to turn the verb into a noun and to make a professional class within the church that we call ministers, the minister of the church. And ultimately, this has been to the detriment of the church, producing a sort of laziness on the part of many Christians.
Because people think, like, oh, that's not my job. He's the professional. Let him do that. The minister, and people backed away from ministry themselves. The every member ministry.
I remember somebody rang me and said, really excitedly, "Hey, Pastor, I've just been witnessing to my neighbour and they're ready to receive Jesus. Can you come and lead them to the Lord?" And I said, "No."
You do that, right?
Yeah, that's it. And then bring them round and I'll be pleased to meet my new brother or sister.
Right.
Ministry is in reality a function of the whole church. That's the New Testament pattern. And it's vital that we have an understanding that the church is the ministry as we look at this topic. Jesus defined ministry in Luke 4 when he noted that he was approved or anointed, empowered to, number one, proclaim the gospel.
So this is Jesus defining his ministry.
Yeah, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because God has anointed me to..." Okay, so the second one was to bind the brokenhearted. And this phrase, bind up the brokenhearted, carries with it a meaning to wrap firmly or put your arms around those who are destroyed or broken. So it implies emotional health.
Like bandaging up, a cut or something. You bandage up somebody emotionally.
Yeah, emotionally.
Yeah.
Then to heal physically, he said to open the eyes of the blind. Then he said to liberate spiritual captives under someone else's control or rule.
Right.
And to proclaim restoration, the acceptable year of the Lord, the Jubilee. So that was a basic description of Jesus' whole ministry when we look at it.
Yeah.
And that's what he did day after day after day. He ministered holistically to those whom he met, whether it was an emotional need, whether it was a madman that he cast demons out of, or whether it was a woman with an issue of blood, whether it was somebody who was saddened by something that had happened. He ministered to the whole need of the individual. And so, in effect, this statement, when he stood up in the synagogue and read that passage from Isaiah, this was in fact his opening statement in ministry.
Basically, I've come to serve. I've come to help. I've come to make the world a better place.
This is the job I've got.
Yeah.
His closing statement, so we go from the opening to his closing, was expressed in the Great Commission, the task that he left the church to continue. The last words of a man, his dying wish,
Right.
if you like, usually express something that's really important to him.
100%. Yeah.
And something that he wants to be remembered. And for Jesus, the most important thing was the continuation of his ministry by the church, to declare the good news, to make disciples, to teach them. This was his final definition of the ministry of the
Right.
church. And what's he going to teach them?
To obey what he did. So, bind up the brokenhearted, heal the sick, release the oppressed. That's what he's saying. Teach my followers to do the same, to also serve.
So the things that I do,
They
as
do,
well.
yeah.
So, what?
Basically, to love.
Yeah.
Teach them
Yeah.
how to love properly.
Yeah.
And don't teach them how to lord it over everybody, which is, if you were looking from the outside in, sometimes you'd think that's what Christians were trying to do, but it's not what Jesus told us to do. He said, serve one another, love one another, show compassion, heal one another. These are the things Jesus came to do, and he's taught us to do as well.
Okay, so what then is ministry? What exactly do you have to do to qualify for Christian ministry?
Well, you have to go to Bible college, Dave, and you have to learn to speak Hebrew and Greek.
So
No.
what is full-time ministry? Is it something that you have to be called to do? And the common understanding, or I think misunderstanding, seems to be that full-time Christian ministry is being employed and being paid by a church or other ministry organisation. So most people have the idea that you have to leave a secular job if you want to do Christian ministry. The two can't exist together as one. But the reality is that Christian ministry is for everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that we are all commanded to do.
Right.
When Jesus said we are to love our neighbours as ourselves, he pointed us to ministry.
Right.
He didn't qualify that statement by saying, love your neighbour as yourself only on Sundays or only if you're a staff member of the church. He meant everyone, every day, in every situation.
Yeah, well, you're called to follow Jesus. He said, follow me. If you claim to be a Christian, if you are a disciple of Christ, that means you are a follower of Christ, which means you're trying to be like him. You're doing what he did, which is to serve.
And so you are in full-time ministry. There's no such a thing as a part-time Christian.
No.
Ministry is something that is not reserved for church staff members. It's for the whole church.
Although when you look at some Christians, you wonder, are they trying to be a part-time Christian here? Just, leave Jesus, in the locker room when I go to play football, or leave him in the car when I go to work. No, you're full-time, right? All of us are full-time, not just staff members of a church, but every Christian is a full-time minister.
And it's not something you just do on Sundays or whatever day your church gathers. It's an attitude and action of serving all the time.
24/7.
Church is not just a place you go, it's who you are.
Right.
You are the church, and therefore the ministry of the church. And we've got to eliminate that separation that you just referred to between spiritual and secular activity. There's a philosophical term called dualism. It was a core tenet of Greco-Roman philosophy and their belief system. And they separated the spiritual and the secular into their own unique compartments, and those compartments shouldn't mix. On the other hand, the Jewish or the Hebrew mindset was singular, was unified. In Hebrew culture, the spiritual was, and still is, completely integrated into every aspect of life. You can't separate those two. You can't leave your religion at the door, as some people want you to do.
Right.
It's part of your life. So you can't just leave it somewhere.
And unfortunately, we do see examples of both of those philosophies amongst people who claim to be Christians. Like some Christians feel like they've that dualism, they've separated, and they go to church on Sunday and they maybe say grace before a meal, or they say a little prayer in the morning, but then the rest of the day is theirs, and they separate the secular from the spiritual. But that's not the way you see. Of course, there are many examples of others in the church that they, the ones, they're full on, they're always, they're full-time Christians, and that's what we're all called to be, full-time Christians. We don't have to be nutters, but we're all full-time Christians. We're all available to God to use wherever we are, even when we're at work.
So to define ministry, I suggest that it boils down to two passages of Scripture. The first is the Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. All of the law and prophets depend on these two commandments. That's what Jesus taught.
Right. And that we often abbreviate that to saying love God and love people.
Yes.
So that's the great commandment. Love God, love people.
And the other one, of course, is the Great Commission,
Right.
where his disciples were instructed to declare the gospel and make disciples of all nations,
Right.
and teach them and baptize them. And what do we teach them? The things that Jesus taught himself.
So in those two things, yes, love God, love people, which is, something that, again, forces us outward. And the Great Commission forces us outward because often our default is inward. Is, my spirituality is my thing, my personal faith, my personal walk with God. It's only about me and God, and it's very inward. But Jesus, both his great command and his great commission, force us outwards.
Yep.
They say, don't forget you are part of community. We're a part of a community. We're part of the world. And to make this work, we need to serve one another.
And when we attempt to do that, when we attempt to live out these two passages, regardless of whether we do so in the context of a church gathering, a Christian community, as a paid staff member, as a volunteer, or just out there on Tuesday morning down at the shops, what we're actually doing at school, at university,
Right.
anywhere you find yourself, is engaging in Christian ministry. That's what it is. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And just in case you don't think that you're good enough, you're competent, or able to do that, Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 3:6 that it's not that we are competent in ourselves to claim that anything comes from us, but our competence comes from God.
Right.
And so Paul wrote, he has enabled us to be competent ministers of his new covenant.
Right.
This new covenant that is not based on written laws, but on the Spirit, because the letter kills, the Spirit gives life.
Right.
So he enables us to be ministers of the gospel.
It's simple. You don't have to learn Hebrew and Greek.
Nope.
You don't have to, go to Bible college. Just by virtue of the fact you're following Jesus means that you can serve your fellow believers and the world around you as well, the people that you meet in your everyday life.
And that from the very first moment you become a Christian.
Absolutely.
So a new Christian's in full-time ministry just as much as
It's
one that's been
all about serving each other's in community. I remember this little parable, if you like, where this guy has an angel comes and appears to this guy and says, "I'm going to show you heaven and hell." And so he goes, "Oh, this will be interesting." And so he takes him first of all to hell, and to his surprise, Dave, in hell there is a banquet table. Huge banquet table. They've got all the best food in the world, and this is in hell. It's every yummy thing. There's drink and food and everything, but everybody is completely emaciated. Everybody's skinny and gaunt and hungry. And he asks the angel, what's going on here? Why is everybody, with all this food, why is everybody so skinny and emaciated and starving? And he said, well, the one caveat, the one thing you have to do is you have to eat anything that you have with a 10-foot long fork. And because they're 10 feet long, you can't feed yourself. You get some chicken on the end of your, back to the chicken joke, you get an apple on the end of your fork, but you can't get it in your mouth because you've got a 10-foot fork. He said, "Oh, this is terrible. This would be torture." He said, It is. And so then they go to heaven. He says, "Let me show you heaven." And sure enough, in heaven, there's the same banquet table. It's full, it's huge, and it's got all the best food in the world, all the best, drinks and everything. It's wonderful. But here, everybody's chubby and fat and getting around happy. And he says, "Oh, so in heaven you don't have to use the 10-foot fork." And he goes, "No, actually, in heaven you also have to use the 10-foot fork. But in heaven, we all feed each other." And that's what ministry is about. Yeah. It's about feeding others and letting them feed you.
Yes.
And that way, everybody gets served and everybody's happy.
That's right.
You like that one?
Okay, I do. Okay, let's look at some...
You didn't get that on a first time round, did you?
Yeah. Let's look at some ministry words.
Ooh, good.
And the first word that I want to look at...
I know you love a good word,
Yeah.
Dave. He's the wordsmith. Dr. Dave.
The first word I want to pick out is deacon. It's
Yeah.
a word that's used in the church, but I want to see how this relates to ministry, obviously.
Okay.
So we basically import this word deacon into the English language. We pinch it from the Greek language, which is diakonia, which is sometimes translated as ministry.
Right.
As a noun, it's a diakonos. Okay, it's a similar word. Is the English word liturgy, which we
Right.
picked out of Latin, liturgia, which can also be translated ministry. So the Corinthian Christians were Christians as a result of Paul's ministry, his diaconia.
Right.
And Paul considered himself to be, when you look at it in the Latin, a liturgios of Jesus Christ. So both these words described, or Paul used to describe himself and his attitude to his life and service. The Greek word diakonos refers to a person who serves. It's not a religious
Right.
term, but the church did adopt it to describe a ministry function
Right.
in the early church, in the book of Acts, where the apostles said, hey, we're focusing on the word and doing the spiritual stuff, so we need some other people who will serve, who will wait on tables and serve others. And that's where we get the first deacons. They chose
Right.
7 deacons. It's probably more accurate to describe the meaning of this word as an assistant.
Right.
It
To assist somebody else.
It indicates that they're whatever they're doing benefits someone else.
Right. So it doesn't matter what language you look at, English, Latin, Greek, doesn't matter.
It all comes to the same
all
thing.
a servant. Yeah.
Paul used this word to describe himself as a servant
Right.
of the Lord. And Paul said that many of his co-workers were servants. He referred to Phoebe, to Tychicus, to Timothy, Epaphras. And the most common meaning of this diakonia is to work with food or to serve other people. Martha served at a dinner.
Right.
In the early church, those 7 were served to wait on tables. So there's a link in there as well.
So what we're saying then, Dave, is even the leaders of a church are servants.
Absolutely.
I love that term, servant leadership.
Yep.
That Jesus was a servant leader. So yes, we're called to lead, and to help facilitate the community of faith, and and help people to be organised so that the community can be effective and organised. But it's still servanthood. It's still something as servant. And it does concern me, Dave, that in more recent times, well, not just in recent times, it actually has been a theme throughout history that we drop the word servant and we just talk about leadership, leaders of the church. But if you drop the word servant, you miss the whole point.
Well, if you drop the word servant, you're missing ministry.
You're missing ministry, exactly. It's just leadership. And it does concern me that sometimes we see leaders of the church more as a CEO of a big organization and, a big company, and he's the one to be served.
Yes.
He's the one who's at the boss. And I think it goes back, traces its origins back to the Old Testament priesthood,
Yes.
where the priest was seen as the man, the paid professional at the front. He's the one that, we all look up to, and the paid professional. So it actually, like you said earlier, it makes us lazy. We don't have to do it. Let him do it. Hey, I don't have to pray for the sick. He's the one paid to do it. And we keep outsourcing ministry, our ministry, to the paid professional. And some denominations still use that term priest because it harkens back to Old Testament. But of course, Jesus, when he came along, he flipped the meaning. He said, no, leaders now are servants. In my kingdom, leaders must be servants, ministers.
And what did he say of himself? I came to
serve.
not to be served.
Yeah.
So the word describes somebody engaging in manual labour as well,
Right.
To help or assist another. That service may be just through speaking. It might be encouraging or whatever. But everyone should serve in the general sense. But each of us serves in a different way. Some serve by speaking, some by manual labour, some whatever we might be doing. It's all part of
Right.
Christian ministry.
Could be making a meal for your neighbor who's doing it a bit tough, you know. It might be, visiting somebody who you notice, some old lady down the street, and you notice she's alone a lot. So you go visit her and, have a cup of tea. That's all serving. That's all helping and blessing.
Paul told the church at Ephesus that the church leader's primary role is to prepare, in other words, to equip God's people for the work of service.
Right.
To equip the saints for the work of ministry, it says in some translation. So it's the work of service. That's the word used here, diakrino. And that's what ministry is about. But Paul doesn't just leave it there.
Ooh, have you got another word for us?
He does. He ups the ante by introducing another word into the idea of Christian ministry. And this word is doulos. It's the Greek word doulos. And he told the Roman church to offer themselves as a living sacrifice, which he defines as the doulos. This takes the concept of service to a new level, because this word doesn't just describe a servant in the ordinary sense, it describes a slave.
Wow.
And Paul frequently called himself a doulos, a slave or servant of Jesus Christ. In Jewish society, a doulos was a household servant, but in Greco-Roman society, it was a slave.
Yeah.
And Paul describes himself as a doulos to those in the Roman community as well as in the Hebrew.
Right.
So Paul tells us in Philippians 2:7 that Christ took on the nature of a doulos.
Wow.
And that is amazing.
Yeah.
He took upon himself the nature of a slave, an indentured servant of the Father. And in such a role, a servant was expected to do whatever was asked, demanded on him by his master, regardless of his own feelings. So,
and as Christians, that's exactly what we sign up for. That's what we do. We bow the knee to Jesus Christ, who's not just our Savior, but he's our Lord.
Absolutely.
He's not just the one who gives us a ticket to heaven when we die, but he's the one we follow. He's our master, and we are like slaves. We volunteer for it, and if you want out, you can get out, but it is 100% bowing the knee to Jesus.
That was really demonstrated by Jesus in the garden.
It sure was.
Where
just before he died,
he knew what was in front of him, and he said, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. In other words, what he was saying, if it's possible, can I get out of this?
Yeah.
But then he says, not my will, but yours.
Yeah.
That's a doulos response.
And that's what every Christian should respond to God with, right? Not my will, but yours be done. I would like to do this, just saying, but God, not my will, but yours be done.
And so it's obeying without reservation. It's obedience to all that is required of us. And that's what Jesus did as our example.
Yeah.
He reminds us too, Jesus reminds us as well, that no servant is greater than his master.
Wow.
So if Jesus was a doulos, if he was a slave and he is our master, guess what? We can't be greater.
Yeah.
This means by definition that the will and desire of a doulos was not in consideration when it came to doing as the master directs, and it doesn't. That's for us as well. All of his interests were of lesser concern than the interest and will of the master.
Yeah.
The doulos was always subservient. So we are called to be a servant, a doulos, a diakonos, whichever term we want to use.
Yeah.
We are the ones who serve God, and serve means ministry.
Yeah, that's what ministry is.
Ministry is, and
of course we do that happily because we trust God.
Yep.
We trust him. We know that, and Jesus 100% trusted him to death, even death on a cross, it says. We trust God. We know that if you're going to be subservient to anyone, God's the guy, right?
Absolutely.
Be subservient to him. You can trust him 100%. He knows what's going on. He knows the future. He knows everything about you. So as we serve him and serve others for him, the world just will be a better place. So,
and that's why deacon is a ministry word.
Right.
It's not just an office or whatever. It's a ministry word and function.
Right. So we're going to go into that a little more detail, or another aspect of it next week. Meanwhile, if you're a member of New Life Nambour here on the Sunshine Coast of Australia, this Sunday we've got our anointing service where we're going to pray for and anoint everybody for ministry, to go into their year ready to roll. We've been waiting for Micah and Anna to get back from Israel and Germany, so they'll be back this Sunday, and we look forward to seeing them again. And we're going to pray for, and as I said, anoint everybody so that we can all, with full zeal, get into our year in servanthood and blessing one another. So God bless you, and we'll see you next week.